The train's rhythmic hum was a lullaby, but my heart pounded like a drum in a war march. I wasn't asleep, not even close, but I kept my eyes shut, my breathing slow, as his fingers brushed my thigh under the blanket. Every nerve in my body screamed awake, alive, and terrified. My name is Eli Carter, a 20-year-old college sophomore, and I was on a cross-country train from Chicago to Portland, chasing a fresh start after a messy breakup. The breakup wasn't just a heartbreak. It was a public crucifixion. My ex, Ryan, had outed me to our entire small-town college after I'd spent years carefully guarding my truth. I wasn't ready for the world to know I was gay, not my parents, not my friends, and definitely not the judgmental whispers of a Midwestern campus. So, I packed a bag, booked a train ticket, and ran toward the Pacific Northwest, hoping distance would dull the shame. The train was half empty, a quiet beast rattling through the American heartland. I'd chosen a window seat, craving solitude, but the universe had other plans. He sat next to me, Jasper Reed, 21, with dark curls that fell into his eyes and a leather jacket that smelled faintly of cedar and rebellion. He introduced himself when he boarded in Omaha, his voice low and warm, like he was sharing a secret. "Mind if I sit here?" he'd asked, and I'd nodded, too tired to care. But now, hours later, under the thin Amtrak blanket we'd both agreed to share because the car was freezing, his touch was rewriting everything. His fingers didn't move at first, just rested there, warm and deliberate. I should have pulled away. I should have opened my eyes, confronted him, or at least shifted to break the contact. But I didn't. I lay still, my breath catching in my throat, pretending to sleep while my mind raced. Was this an accident? A mistake? Or was he testing me, waiting to see if I'd react? The blanket felt like a cocoon, shielding us from the world, but it also trapped me in a storm of questions. Who was this guy? And why did his touch feel like both a spark and a wound? Jasper hadn't said much during the first few hours. He'd sketched in a worn notebook, his pencil scratching softly, occasionally glancing at me like he was studying a puzzle. I caught his eye once, and he'd smelled a small, crooked thing that made my stomach flip. I told myself it was nothing. I'd been burned before, and I wasn't about to let a stranger on a train unravel me. But now, with his hand on my thigh, I was unraveling fast. The train jolted, and his fingers tightened briefly, sending a shiver up my spine. I kept my eyes closed, my face turned toward the window, where the Midwest blurred into streaks of gold and green. My heart was a traitor, hammering loud enough I was sure he could hear it. I wanted to know what he was thinking, why he was doing this, but I was too scared to move. Too scared to break the spell. Because beneath the fear, there was something else, something warm and reckless that wanted him to keep going. I'd spent my life hiding. Growing up in a small Illinois town, I learned early to keep my head down. My dad was a pastor, my mom a teacher, and our house was a shrine to normal. I knew I was different by middle school, but I buried it under football practice and church youth group. When I came out to Ryan in college, I thought I'd found someone who saw me or ally saw me. But he used my truth as a weapon, and the fallout left me raw. Now, on this train, Jasper's touch was pulling at the seams of my carefully stitched armor. The train slowed, pulling into a station somewhere in Iowa. Jasper's hand retreated, and I felt the absence like a punch. I cracked my eyes open just enough to see him staring out the window, his jaw tight, his fingers tapping nervously on his knee. He didn't look at me, but I could feel the weight of his thoughts. Was he ashamed? Scared? Or was he, like me, caught in a moment he didn't know how to name? I shifted slightly, letting him know I was waking up. He glanced over, his hazel eyes catching the dim light. Hey, he said softly, like nothing had happened. You sleep okay? Yeah, I lied, my voice rough. You. He shrugged, his lips twitching into that crooked smile again. Not really. Too much on my mind. I wanted to ask what, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I pulled the blanket tighter around me, like it could protect me from whatever was happening between us. The train lurched forward, carrying us deeper into the night, and I wondered if I'd imagined it all. But the heat of his touch lingered, and I knew I hadn't. As the hours passed, Jasper and I started talking small things at first, like the music he liked, indie rock, mostly, and the books I'd read, too many dystopias. He was a graphic design student, heading to Portland for an internship, running from something he didn't name. His voice was steady, but his eyes carried a story he wasn't ready to tell. I recognized that look. I'd seen it in the mirror. By the time the train crossed into Nebraska, the air between us had shifted. We weren't strangers anymore, but we weren't friends either. We were something else, something fragile and electric. The blanket stayed over our legs, a silent agreement, and I wondered if he'd touch me again. Part of me prayed he wouldn't. Part of me prayed he would. The night deepened, and the train's hum grew softer, like it was holding its breath. Jasper leaned closer, his shoulder brushing mine, and whispered, "You ever feel like you're running from something, but it's still right there with you?" I swallowed hard, my heart racing again. All the time. He nodded, like he'd known my answer before I said it. His hand moved under the blanket again, slower this time, more deliberate. I didn't pretend to sleep. I didn't move. I just let myself feel everything. The train's lights flickered, casting Jasper's face in a dance of shadow and gold. His hand lingered on my thigh, a quiet question I didn't know how to answer. I met his gaze, and for a moment, the world shrank to just us two strangers on a train, bound by something neither of us could name. I pulled back slightly, not because I wanted to, but because I was drowning in the intensity of it all. Jasper's hand retreated, and he looked away, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of the blanket. "Sorry," he muttered, barely audible over the train's hum. "I didn't mean to. I just thought." "It's okay," I said quickly, my voice betraying the storm inside me. It wasn't okay, not entirely, but it wasn't wrong either. I was caught between fear and want, and I hated how much I wanted to feel his touch again. The silence that followed was heavy, like the air before a storm. I stared at the window, where the world outside was a blur of dark fields and distant lights. My reflection stared back, pale and uncertain, a boy who'd spent his life running from himself. Jasper's reflection was there too, his head tilted back, eyes closed, like he was trying to escape his own thoughts. I broke the silence first. "Why Portland?" I asked, my voice softer than I meant it to be. He opened his eyes, glancing at me with a mix of caution and curiosity. "Fresh start," he said simply. "Got tired of people telling me who I'm supposed to be." I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to admit. "Same." He chuckled, a low, bitter sound. "Funny how running away doesn't always work. Huh?" "Yeah," I said, my throat tight. "It follows you." We didn't talk about his touch, but it hung between us like a third passenger. Instead, we talked about safer things, movies, music, the little towns we'd both left behind. Jasper grew up in a Nebraska suburb, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business. He didn't say it outright, but I could tell he'd been suffocated there, just like I'd been in Illinois. We were both escapees, chasing freedom but dragging our pasts along. As the night wore on, The train's rhythm lulled us into a fragile truce. We shared a bag of chips from the dining car, laughing when they spilled on the blanket. It felt normal, almost safe, but the undercurrent of tension never faded. Every time our shoulders brushed or our hands grazed, my pulse spiked. I wondered if he felt it too. By dawn, the train was rolling through Wyoming, the sky bruising purple and orange. Jasper had fallen asleep, his head tilted against the seat, his sketchbook open on his lap. I stole a glance at Ida's half-finished drawing of a boy with my jawline, my eyes sitting by a train window. My breath caught. He'd been sketching me. I didn't wake him. Instead, I watched the sunrise, my mind replaying his touch, his words, his smile. I was scared of what this meant, scared of what I wanted, scared of the world outside this train. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. When Jasper woke, he saw me looking at his sketchbook and flushed, snapping it shut. "Didn't mean for you to see that," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's good," I said honestly. "Really good." He smiled, shy and unguarded, and something in me cracked open. We didn't talk about the sketch, but it felt like a confession. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of small talk and stolen glances. The blanket still draped over us like a shared secret. By midday, the train stopped in Salt Lake City for a longer break. We stepped onto the platform, stretching our legs, the mountain air sharp and clean. Jasper bought us coffee from a vendor, and we sat on a bench, watching passengers come and go. He told me about his art, how it was the only thing that kept him sane growing up. I told him about my writing, how I'd filled journals with stories I was too afraid to share. "You should write about this," he said, gesturing to the train, the mountains, us. "It's a story worth telling." I laughed, but the idea stuck. What was our story? Two scared kids on a train, reaching for something they didn't understand. Or something more. Back on the train, the dynamic shifted. Jasper was bolder, sitting closer, his knee brushing mine under the blanket. I didn't pull away this time. I let myself lean into it, let myself feel the warmth of him next to me. The world outside was vast and unforgiving, but in this moment, we were untouchable. As the train climbed into the Rockies, the landscape grew wilder, mirroring the chaos in my chest. Jasper's hand found mine under the blanket, his fingers intertwining with mine. It wasn't a question, Anna Maria, it was a statement. I squeezed his hand back, my heart pounding, and for the first time, I didn't pretend to be asleep. Jasper's hand in mine was an anchor, grounding me even as my heart raced like the train speeding through the Rockies. His fingers were warm, calloused from sketching, and I could feel his pulse matching mine. Neither of us spoke, but the silence was loud with meaning. The train carved through mountains, their peaks jagged against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. I wanted to freeze this moment, to stay in this bubble where no one could judge us, where I didn't have to be Eli Carter, the pastor's son with a secret. But the world doesn't stop for moments like this, and neither did the train. Jasper broke the silence first. "You ever done this before?" His voice was low, cautious, like he was stepping onto thin ice. I knew what he meant, but I played dumb, my throat tight. "Done what?" He squeezed my hand, his eyes searching mine. "This. You and me. Whatever this is." I swallowed hard, my mind flashing to Ryan, to the betrayal that still stung. "Not like this," I said finally. "Not real." He nodded, like he understood more than I'd said. Me neither. The admission hung between us, heavy and fragile. I wanted to ask him everything who he'd left behind, what he was running from, why his eyes carried so much weight. But before I could, the train's intercom crackled, announcing a delay due to track maintenance. We'd be stopped for a couple of hours in a small Colorado town. Jasper grinned, a spark of mischief in his eyes. "Want to explore?" I hesitated. Getting off the train felt like stepping out of our safe little world, but his smile was impossible to resist. "Sure," I said, and we grabbed our jackets, leaving the blanket behind. The town was barely a blip main street lined with a diner, a gas station, and a thrift store. We wandered into the diner, the bell above the door jingling as we entered. The place smelled of coffee and fried onions, and the waitress, a woman with a kind smile, called us Han as she handed us menus. We ordered milkshake Escalade for me, strawberry for Jasper, and sat in a booth by the window, our knees bumping under the table. "You're different out here," Jasper said, sipping his shake. "Less guarded." I raised an eyebrow. "You've known me for, what, a day?" He laughed, a sound that warmed me more than the diner's heater. "Feels longer." It did. Time on the train was strange, stretching and bending until a day felt like a lifetime. We talked about nothing and everything: our favorite movies, the worst teachers we'd had, the dreams we didn't dare speak aloud. Jasper wanted to design album covers for bands. I wanted to write novels that made people feel less alone. We were two kids with big plans and bigger fears. And for a moment, the diner felt like home. But the world has a way of intruding. A group of guys walked in, loud and rough, their voices carrying over the jukebox. One of them, a tall guy with a trucker hat, glanced at us, his eyes lingering too long. I felt it shift, the judgment. Jasper's smile faded, and he sat back, his shoulders tensing. "Let's go," I said quietly, tossing some cash on the table. Outside, the air was crisp, the mountains looming like silent judges. We walked back to the train in silence, our hands brushing but not holding. The moment in the diner had reminded us both of the world we couldn't escape, the one that made us hide who we were. Back on the train, the blanket was waiting, a small comfort. Jasper didn't reach for my hand this time, and I didn't know how to bridge the gap. Instead, he pulled out his sketchbook and started drawing, his pencil moving with a quiet intensity. I watched, mesmerized, as he sketched the diner, capturing the curve of the counter, the light through the window, and two figures in a booth, their heads close together. "Is that us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't look up. "Yeah." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. The train started moving again, the delay over, and we settled back into our seats. The blanket felt heavier now, like it carried the weight of our unspoken fears. I wanted to tell him I was scared not just of him, but of myself, of what it meant to want this, to want him. But the words wouldn't come. As night fell, Jasper spoke again, his voice soft but steady. "I'm not good at this," he said, staring at his sketchbook. "Letting people in. But I want to. With you." My heart stopped, then started again, faster. "Why me?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. He looked at me then, his eyes raw and unguarded. "Because you feel like home." I didn't know what to say, so I reached for his hand under the blanket, my fingers finding his. He squeezed back, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was running. Jasper's words echoed in my head, "You feel like home." They were a lifeline, pulling me towards something I'd spent my life avoiding. But as the train rolled through Idaho, the weight of those words pressed against the fear I couldn't shake. We didn't talk much after that. The blanket stayed over us, a fragile shield, but the air between us was charged with new questions. What were we doing? Where could this go? Two guys on a train, holding hands in secret, didn't exactly scream happy ending in a world that loved to judge. I glanced at Jasper, his head resting against the seat, his eyes half closed. He looked peaceful, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers tightened around mine every time the train jolted. He was as scared as I was, maybe more. I wanted to ask about his past, about the shadows in his eyes, but I didn't know how to start. Instead, I pulled out my journal, the one I'd been scribbling in since high school. It was full of half-finished stories, fragments of myself I'd never shown anyone. I flipped to a blank page and started writing. Not a story this time, but a letter I'd never sent. Dear Jasper, I wrote, I don't know what this is, but it's the first time I've felt alive in years. He stirred, glancing at my journal. What are you writing? I snapped it shut, my face heating up. Nothing. Just thoughts. He raised an eyebrow, a playful glint in his eyes. Secrets. Huh. Maybe, I said, managing a smile. You've got plenty of your own. He laughed, but it was tinged with something heavier. Fair enough. The train stopped again, this time in Boise for a quick passenger exchange. We stayed on board, the blanket pulled tight around us. The car was quieter now, most passengers asleep or lost in their own worlds. It felt like we were the only ones awake, the only ones who mattered. Jasper pulled out his sketchbook again, flipping to a new page. Can I draw you? He asked, his voice soft but serious. I hesitated, my old insecurities flaring. Why? Because you're worth drawing, he said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. My throat tightened, and I nodded, unable to speak. He started sketching, his eyes flicking between me and the page. I tried to sit still, but my mind was racing. No one had ever looked at me like that, like I was something worth capturing. Ryan had called me cute once, but it felt like a transaction, not a truth. Jasper's gaze was different, intense, reverent, like he saw parts of me I didn't even know existed. When he finished, he turned the sketchbook toward me. It was me, but not the me I saw in the mirror. This Eli had a quiet strength, a spark in his eyes I didn't recognize. That's not me, I said, half joking. It's you, he said firmly. You just don't see it yet. I didn't know how to respond, so I leaned closer, our shoulders touching. The blanket felt like a confession, hiding us from the world. His hand found mine again, and this time, I didn't hesitate to hold on. As the train moved deeper into the night, Jasper told me more about himself. He'd grown up with a dad who didn't understand him, a mom who left when he was 10, and a town that expected him to be someone he wasn't. He'd known he was gay since he was 13, but he'd only come out to a few friends, and it hadn't gone well. They didn't kick me out or anything, he said, his voice low. But they stopped looking at me the same. I nodded, the memory of Ryan's betrayal sharp in my chest. I get it. My ex, he told everyone. Didn't even give me a choice. Jasper's eyes darkened. That's messed up. Yeah, I said, my voice breaking. It was. He squeezed my hand, his thumb tracing small circles on my skin. You didn't deserve that. I wanted to believe him, but the shame was still there, a shadow I couldn't outrun. Jasper seemed to sense it, because he leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. You're enough, Eli. Just as you are. The words hit me like a wave, and I felt tears prick my eyes. I turned away, pretending to look out the window, but Jasper didn't let go of my hand. We sat like that for hours, the train carrying us closer to Portland, closer to whatever came next. By morning, the landscape had changed, rolling hills giving way to dense forests. Jasper was sketching again, this time a scene of the train winding through the trees. I watched him, marveling at how his hands moved, how he turned chaos into beauty. I wanted to be that brave, to create something real, but I was still too scared to try. As the train slowed for another stop, Jasper looked at me, his eyes serious. What happens when we get to Portland? I froze, the question cutting through me. I don't know, I admitted. What do you want to happen? He didn't answer right away, but his grip on my hand tightened. I want this, he said finally. Whatever it is. My heart soared and sank at the same time. I wanted it too, but the world was waiting, and I wasn't sure I was ready to face it. The train's hum was a constant now, a heartbeat tying Jasper and me together as we hurtled toward Portland. His words, "I want this," echoed in my mind, a promise and a challenge. But as the miles ticked by, doubt crept in, cold and sharp like the Oregon air seeping through the window. We were in the final stretch, less than a day from our destination. The blanket still covered us, but it felt thinner now, less like a shield and more like a reminder of how fragile this was. Jasper's hand hadn't left mine, but his eyes were distant, like he was wrestling with his own ghosts. I wanted to ask what he was thinking, but I was afraid of the answer. Instead, I pulled out my journal again, scribbling fragments of thoughts I couldn't say out loud. What if this is just a moment? What if we get off this train and everything falls apart? The words looked childish on the page, but they were honest. Jasper noticed, his lips curving into a small smile. Still keeping secrets. I shrugged, closing the journal. Just trying to figure things out. He nodded, like he was doing the same. You ever think about what you'd do if you weren't afraid? The question hit me hard, stripping away my defenses. All the time, I said. But fear's a hard thing to shake. Yeah, he said softly. But sometimes you find something worth being brave for. I looked at him, my chest tight. He wasn't just talking about us, was talking about himself. About the courage it took to sit here, to hold my hand, to let himself want this. I wanted to be that brave, but the weight of my past off Ryan, of my family, of a world that didn't always make room for people like us held me back. The train stopped in a small Oregon town, and we stepped off for fresh air. The platform was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of pine. Jasper lit a cigarette, the smoke curling around him like a halo. I didn't smoke, but I stood close, watching the way his fingers shook slightly as he exhaled. You okay? I asked, breaking the silence. He took a long drag, then flicked the cigarette away. Just thinking about what's waiting in Portland. Got a job lined up, but it's a new city. New people. Feels like starting over. I nodded, understanding too well. I'm starting over too. No job yet. Just hope. He looked at me, his eyes softening. You'll figure it out. You're stronger than you think. I laughed, a bitter edge to it. I don't feel strong. You are, he said, stepping closer. You're here, aren't you? That's not nothing. His words warmed me, but they also scared me. What if I wasn't strong enough for this for us? I pushed the thought away, focusing on the moment, on the way his breath clouded in the cold air, on the way his eyes held mine like I was the only thing that mattered. Back on the train, the mood shifted. Jasper was quieter, his sketches more frantic, like he was trying to capture something before it slipped away. I watched him draw, my heart aching with a mix of hope and fear. I wanted to believe in this, in us, but the closer we got to Portland, the louder the doubts became. That night, as the train wound through the Cascades, Jasper leaned close, his voice barely a whisper. "Can I tell you something?" I nodded, my heart pounding. "I've never felt like this before," he said, his eyes locked on mine. "Not with anyone. It scares the hell out of me." "Me too," I admitted, my voice shaking. "But I don't want it to stop." He smiled, a real smile, and for a moment, the world felt right. He kissed my knuckles, a small, tender gesture that sent a shiver through me. The blanket was our world again, hiding us from the other passengers, from the reality waiting outside. But reality wasn't far off. As the train neared Portland, the intercom announced our arrival time, early the next morning. Panic gripped me. What happened when we stepped off this train? Would Jasper disappear into his new life, leaving me with nothing but memories? I must have looked as scared as I felt, because Jasper squeezed my hand. "We'll figure it out," he said, like he could read my mind. "Together." I wanted to believe him, but the fear was still there, a shadow I couldn't outrun. As the train carried us closer to our destination, I held onto his hand, praying he was right. The train's final hours felt like a countdown, each mile pulling Jasper and me closer to a truth we weren't ready to face. His hand stayed in mine, but his eyes were on the window, watching the Oregon landscape blur into a tapestry of green and gray. I wanted to freeze time, to stay in this moment where we were just us. No labels, no expectations. But the world doesn't wait. The train's intercom crackled, announcing our approach to Portland. My stomach twisted. Jasper felt it too. I could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his fingers tightened around mine. We hadn't talked about what came next. Not really. And the silence was starting to feel like a wall. I broke it first. "What's your plan when we get there?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He shrugged, his eyes still on the window. "Start my internship. Find a place to crash. Figure out how to live without looking over my shoulder." I nodded, my throat tight. "And us?" He turned to me then, his hazel eyes raw with emotion. I meant what I said. "Eli, I want this. But I don't know how to do it." "I've never." "Me neither," I said quickly, cutting him off. "But I want to try." He smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "It's not going to be easy. You know that, right?" I did. I knew the world we were stepping into wasn't kind to people like us. Not always. I'd felt it in the diner, in the way those guys looked at us, in the way Ryan's betrayal had torn through my life. But looking at Jasper, I felt something stronger than fear-hope. The train slowed, pulling into Portland's Union Station. The blanket was folded now, tucked between us like a memory. We grabbed our bags, our hands brushing as we stood. The platform was chaos, people rushing, voices overlapping, but for a moment, it was just us, standing close, our eyes locked. "Let's stick together," Jasper said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his eyes. "At least for today." I nodded, my heart racing. "Okay." We stepped off the train, the morning air cool and sharp. Portland was alive around us, a city of bridges and rain and possibility. Jasper took my hand, a bold move in the open air, and I let him. It felt like a declaration, like we were staking a claim on something bigger than ourselves. We found a coffee shop near the station, A cozy place with mismatched chairs and the smell of fresh espresso. We sat by the window, our knees touching under the table, and talked about the future for the first time. Jasper's internship was at a small design firm downtown. I had a lead on a bookstore job through a friend of a friend. We made plans to explore the city, to find cheap apartments, to build something new. But the fear lingered. As we walked through Portland streets, passing couples and families, I felt the weight of eyes on us. Jasper's hand in mine felt like a lifeline, but also a target. I wondered if he felt it too, but he didn't let go, and that gave me courage. That night, we found a cheap motel to crash in, too tired to keep searching for a place to stay. The room was small, the bed creaking under our weight, but it felt like a sanctuary. Jasper kissed me for the first time, a soft, hesitant press of lips that turned into something deeper, something that made my heart sing. We didn't go further not yet, but we fell asleep tangled together, the world outside forgotten. The next morning, reality hit hard. Jasper got a call from his internship coordinator, saying they needed him to start right away. I had an interview at the bookstore, but it was across town, and we'd have to split up. As we stood outside the motel, bags slung over our shoulders, I felt the distance growing already. "Meet me tonight," Jasper said, his voice urgent. "By the river, near the Hawthorne Bridge. 7 o'clock. I nodded, memorizing the way he looked in the morning, light hair messy, eyes bright, a boy who'd changed my world in 3 days. "I'll be there." We parted ways, and the day dragged on, each hour heavy with anticipation. The bookstore interview went well, but my mind was on Jasper, on the promise of tonight. I wondered if this was how it felt to fall in love, terrifying, exhilarating, like stepping off a cliff and hoping someone would catch you. The day stretched on, each minute a battle against doubt. I wandered Portland's streets after my interview, the city's pulse both thrilling and overwhelming. By the time I reached the Hawthorne Bridge, the sun was setting, painting the Willamette River in shades of fire. Jasper was already there, leaning against the railing, his sketchbook tucked under his arm. He looked up as I approached, his smile chasing away the cold. "You made it," he said, like he hadn't been sure I would. "Of course," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "How was your day?" He shrugged, but his eyes were bright. "Busy. They've got me designing logos already. It's intense." I nodded, proud but nervous. "I got the bookstore job. Start next week." His face lit up, and he pulled me into a hug, his arms strong around me. "That's awesome, Eli." We stood there, watching the river, the city lights flickering to life. It felt like a moment stolen from someone else's life, someone braver. But then Jasper's phone buzzed, and his face darkened as he read the message. "What's wrong?" I asked, my stomach twisting. He hesitated, then handed me the phone. It was a text from someone named Caleb. "Heard you're in Portland. You can't run from what you did. We need to talk." I looked at Jasper, my heart pounding. "Who's Caleb?" He took a deep breath, his eyes on the river. "My ex. Things didn't end well." I waited, sensing there was more. He ran a hand through his hair, his voice low. "I was outed too. Not like you. But Caleb told people I wasn't ready to tell. Said it was for my own good, but it felt like a betrayal. I left town after that." My chest ached, the parallel too close to my own story. "I'm sorry," I said, reaching for his hand. He squeezed back, but his eyes were distant. "He's in Portland now. Works at a bar downtown. I didn't think he'd find me." The air felt heavier now, the city less welcoming. I wanted to say something to fix it, but all I could do was hold his hand, letting him know I was there. We walked along the river, talking about lighter things, trying to reclaim the moment. Jasper told me about his favorite Portland spots from pictures he'd seen online: food carts, bookstores, the forest trails outside the city. I told him about my dream of writing a novel, one that told stories like ours. He listened like he cared, like my dreams mattered. As night fell, we found a quiet park, sitting on a bench under a street lamp. Jasper pulled out his sketchbook, showing me drawings from the train me, the mountains, the diner. Each one was a piece of our journey, a map of the moments that had brought us here. I want to keep this, he said, his voice soft. Us. But I'm scared I'll mess it up. You won't, I said, though I was just as scared. We'll figure it out together. He kissed me again, slower this time, like he was memorizing me. The world faded away, and for a moment, it was just us, two boys against the odds. But the world doesn't stay quiet. As we walked back to the motel, we passed a group of guys outside a bar. One of them shouted something slurs I'd heard before, words that cut like knives. Jasper's hand tightened in mine, but he didn't let go. I wanted to run, but his grip kept me steady. Keep walking, he whispered, his voice calm but firm. We did, but the words followed us, a reminder of the world we couldn't escape. Back at the motel, we sat on the bed, the silence heavy. Jasper's phone buzzed again. Caleb, asking to meet. Jasper ignored it, but I could see the weight it carried. I'll deal with him tomorrow, he said finally. But tonight's ours. I nodded, leaning into him. We fell asleep holding each other, the city's hum a distant echo. But as I drifted off, I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would change everything. Morning broke over Portland, gray and soft, like the city was holding its breath. Jasper was already awake, sitting by the motel window, his sketchbook open but untouched. I knew he was thinking about Caleb, about the past that had followed him here. You don't have to meet him, I said, sitting up in bed. He shook his head. I do. If I don't face him, I'll never stop running. I understood, even if it scared me. We got ready in silence, the weight of the day pressing down. Jasper's internship started at noon, and I had to check out of the motel, find a place to stay. But first, we'd face Caleb together. The bar was downtown, a gritty place with neon signs and a sticky floor. Caleb was waiting outside, taller than I'd imagined, with sharp eyes and a smirk that made my skin crawl. He looked at Jasper like he owned him, then glanced at me, his smirk fading. So, this is why you left, Caleb said, his voice dripping with disdain. Jasper stood taller, his hand brushing mine. I left because you crossed a line. You don't get to control me anymore. Caleb laughed, but it was hollow. You think you're free now? With him. He nodded at me, and I felt the old shame creeping in. Jasper stepped forward, his voice steady. Yeah. With him. And I'm more free than I ever was with you. Caleb's face twisted, but he didn't argue. He muttered something about moving on and walked away, disappearing into the city. Jasper let out a breath, his shoulders relaxing for the first time that morning. You okay? I asked, my voice shaking. He nodded, pulling me into a hug. Better now. We spent the rest of the day building our new life. Jasper started his internship, and I found a cheap room to rent near the bookstore. We met up that evening, walking along the river again, the city lights reflecting on the water. It wasn't perfect, there were still doubts, Still fears, but it was ours. Months later, we were still together, sharing a tiny apartment filled with Jasper's sketches and my journals. The world wasn't always kind, but we faced it together, holding hands in public even when it scared us. We were learning to be brave, to be ourselves, to love without shame. One night, Jasper showed me a new sketch, a train winding through the mountains. Two figures under a blanket, their hands intertwined. "This is where it started," he said, his voice soft. "You and me." I kissed him, my heart full. "And it's where we'll keep going." The train had carried us to Portland, but it was our choices, our courage that made us whole. We weren't just running anymore. We were building a home, one moment at a time.